Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Stephanie Gaulding, Managing Director at Pharmatech Associates, a full-service global consultancy that helps manufacturers bring quality medicines to patients. Stephanie has extensive experience in quality at companies such as Eli Lilly and Boehringer Ingelheim before she embarked on offering consulting services to the industry. In this episode, Stephanie explains how to develop an effective oversight plan, what to include in a business case for quality, and she discusses why it's so important to look cross-industry if we're to drive progress. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke. I'm happy to be here.
Very nice to see you. To start with then, it'd be great to have a bit of an overview about the work you do at Pharmatech Associates.
I joined Pharmatech Associates about 5 years ago, just a little over 5 years ago. And Pharmatech Associates is a life sciences consultancy. We focus on bringing drugs to the market, whether that's here in the US or around the world. We have a very strong background in product development and quality and regulatory compliance. And when I look at the company was actually founded 30 years ago.
Okay.
So we've been around for quite a bit of time, and we started as a validation firm back in the day, as we like to talk about. And over the years, really organically added in services and capabilities around drug development, including things like choosing CDMO partners, CDMO oversight, tech transfer capabilities, and then really grew into the larger quality and regulatory compliance services that really are part of the company today.
And what was your background before that?
Mostly QA and QC. I spent a very brief stint early in my career as a research associate in a biotech company back in what I call the early heydays of the biotech industry, where Genentech and Amgen and the company I worked for, Human Genome Sciences, were all young biotech startups. I figured out pretty quickly into that first role that R&D space was not a space that I was super comfortable in. So as our company grew from when I joined, it was about just under 100 people to well over 1,200 people or 1,200 people. There's a lot of opportunity that started to show up in the quality control and quality assurance space. And I moved into a quality control lab position and spent a number of years there, and probably would have made a career out of quality control if I hadn't developed a sensitivity to acetic acid, which is a very weird, rare thing to have happen to somebody.
Okay.
And so I had to find something different and moved into quality assurance as a result, because then I wasn't in a lab, I wasn't exposed to chemicals and creating other sensitivities and other reactions in my body. And had a great, wonderful first QA manager and mentor. She really became a foundational mentor for me as I went along the journey, and really fell in love with the work that quality professionals do, and particularly in our industry, working with the medicines that we produce, taking care and making sure that patients are at the forefront of our mind and what we do really has become a lifelong passion for me.
Thank you. Quality is clearly so important to the developing and the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals and biologics. But what we hear so often from those in quality roles is that it's a bit of an afterthought. So I'm interested to get your take on that, and how should oversight be built in throughout that whole CDMO and sponsor relationship? What are the best practices around that?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes, especially when you're in earlier stage organizations, I think we refer to it as quality being an aftersight, but I think part of it is actually just there's this constraint on resources, and sometimes just even the founders or the early management team members may or may not put the resourcing on the quality aspects in that early space. But I think the reality is involving quality early sets up the development program in a manner in which working through that relationship, especially with a CDMO who's working to help develop process, help develop the product further, that you've got somebody in that role that's really championing the quality elements, looking for data integrity issues, getting them resolved, so that when that data and information from the early program development ultimately makes it into a product approval application. You've got the necessary data there, and you're not working to remediate or fill in gaps as you go along the pike later. And I think that that's a piece of what I typically see, especially now that I've been doing consulting for the last 10 years, that sometimes they wait a little bit too late to pull the trigger, to pull the quality element in. And so I think fundamentally, one of my recommendations to companies that are pursuing outsourcing partnerships is really make sure that, whether through a contracted relationship with a firm like mine, or by hiring your own quality folks, that you've got some quality elements represented. And I think when you start to look at building that relationship with a CDMO, really what you're looking at is investing in building and selecting the right partner up front. I do a lot of talks and conversations with people about what that selection process looks like. But I think the foundation for that is, as you go through the selection process, making sure you're looking at not only technical capabilities, business, financial stability, the kind of classic, more due diligence kind of activities that many procurement teams will do, and kind of everybody gravitates toward, but include things like, the culture of the organization. Understand your culture, understand the organization culture that you're evaluating, and are they going to be a fit, right? And so look at, how they like to handle and communicate. Are they a little bit lax about their communication? Are they really formal and structured with their communication? What does your organization prefer to have, right? And start to have those pieces. And I think if you spend the time in those early selection spaces evaluating a potential partner on kind of all of the elements, including that cultural and relationship values kind of space, which every time I talk to people about it, it always feels a little bit weird to be talking about culture in a due diligence exercise. But the reality is, especially if you're sole sourcing and you're putting, as a startup and a drug sponsor, your investment in the CDMO, and you're choosing them really for the life of your product. Like your plan is to go to market with this potential CDMO, which does happen, right? That relationship aspect can be a big derailer if it's not considered in that upfront stage. And then I think when you look at having selected your partner, some of what I actually recommend in that early stage is to do some formal meetings as part of the overall startup process of that relationship, where you spend time in those meetings talking about the communication practices, the escalation practices. And yes, they should all feed into things like quality agreements, the formal structured contractual arrangements. Those will have clear roles and responsibilities in them, and you'll have, the contractual dispute resolution aspects. But there's nothing that replaces that conversation and dialogue between two parties to say, how are we going to engage? Who from either side is going to engage on a regular basis? How is information going to flow between the two organizations? How, as a drug sponsor, are we going to evaluate your performance as an outsourcing partner for us initially and as the relationship evolves? And so when I look at oversight in a drug sponsor CDMO relationship, I really recommend structuring a plan. And this can really be a formal document that gets written up that really has kind of the general information about the partnership. Is it specific to one product? Is it multi-product? Is it, just the development and initial early stage first in man study type batches? Or are we talking about, this relationship's intended to go all the way through the commercial space? And then moving into how the two groups will interact, what data platforms they're going to use, what are those expectations around timeliness of communication, response times, things like that. There's nothing worse than selecting a CDMO partner where your expectation is you send an email and you're getting a response in 24 hours, and it takes them 3 or 4 or 5 days to get a response back to you, right? And so having those conversations, putting those kind of ground rules in place for the relationship, and then building on those ground rules to establish the KPIs and performance criteria for their relationship. And then really spending some time in that planning stage to understand data and how that's going to move between the organizations. Is it going to be really old school nowadays? And I kind of hate to say this, but 30 plus years in the industry, you start to realize that, you know, scanning paper records has been around for a long time.
Mm.
That is certainly one way to do business, but it may not be the best way to do business in today's day and age. Is the CDMO in a position where you're going to get access to be able to review data in their LIMS system, get access to their EQMS system, that some of the more advanced CDMOs that we've seen and our clients have partnered with have been in those kind of modes where the data is available to the drug sponsor real time and in the system, and they have their own login credentials and they get their own training on the system. And more importantly, part of that data conversation is ultimately at some point data has to, and I think we all like to assume our products are going to be super successful in the clinic. So data has to make its way into a submission. And that's everything from stability data to manufacturing and process summary data. How does that data flow back and forth between the CDMO and the drug sponsor? Because especially when the partnerships are outsourced and the relationships are outsourced, the technology and the manufacturing capabilities outsourced, that CDMO over time really becomes an expert in the manufacturing process and technology. And so making sure that information makes it back, that knowledge makes it back to the drug sponsor is certainly a key avenue. So when I look at oversight plans, I think if you've got, kind of the general outlay of the partnership described, and you can articulate that, you can describe who's interacting with whom, who the key contact are, what those performance metrics are, and then ultimately how data and knowledge are going to be shared between the two entities. That ultimately forms a good solid basis. And it provides, especially when you do this in a written form, something that you can go back to periodically through, whether it's a periodic business review meeting or whether it's a quarterly structure, some sort of annual structure, depending on maybe the volume you have with a CDMO, to go back and look and make adjustments. I also look at things like risk management, change management as a part of that oversight planning. Typically in that document, I'll encourage drug sponsors to go through and assess any early stage risks as they begin that partnership, develop mitigation strategies. And then the important piece is, if you're going to go through this process of structurally thinking about, in a structured manner, thinking about oversight and documenting your approach to oversight, you also want to be in that space where you're revisiting it, because oversight is going to shift over time. And there are things where these outsourcing relationships go really well. And that's a great thing to see that, but there's time, effort, and energy that goes into planning and managing those relationships so they do go well. And then other cases, events will happen, stress will enter the relationship. There's nothing worse when something goes wrong with the batch that's been manufactured for, a clinical study or a commercial lot, and it can't be released for some reason. That can put some strain on the relationship, and certainly navigating those, considering maybe doing after action review. So talking about, how did we navigate that? Is the relationship still where it needs to be? Do we need to do a little bit of work on that space? But having that constant dialogue about the relationship, and not just about the technical stuff or the quality attributes or a deviation or a change control that's being circulated or reviewed, but making it a point in that oversight relationship and that partnership journey where you're consciously talking about the relationship is, I think, a foundational piece to having long-term successful relationships with outsourcing partners.
Absolutely. Thank you. Where does this sit? Where does the oversight plan sit from a organizational point of view? Who owns the plan? Does quality own the plan? Is it within your external manufacturing lead, project management? Where does it sit within your org?
I don't think that there's a specific answer to that. I have seen it live in the quality organization. I have also seen it live in like an MS&T type function, whether it's a project lead or a product lead, whatever their individual organization is calling that lead. I think where it resides is less important than the involvement
Mm.
of the cross-functional team members in not only the creation of the oversight plan and the conversations that lead to its creation, but also in that what I call that maintenance and periodic review cycle, that everybody's taking a look at it from both sides. And that goes for both parties on the drug sponsor side and parties on the CDMO side, that you're collectively creating the buy-in from all of the necessary functions, because you're involving manufacturing, you're involving, in essence, often a project lead on both sides of the organizations, you're involving quality, you're involving procurement. You end up touching a lot of different functions and capabilities. And so in this kind of case, I'm very much a stickler. Where you house this and who technically owns this is less important than the fact that somebody does own it, it does exist,
Mm-hmm.
and that you hold the right people into the conversation from both the drug sponsor as well as the
Yeah,
CDMO,
great.
right? And that it really has become a part of that structure. I think it's probably about a 60-40 split between that project lead functionality, whether it's a CMC lead, a project manager, terminology varies,
Mm-hmm.
and quality, as to how I kind of see that document managed. But it doesn't matter. Like I said, the robust ones, the ones that are not just oversight plans on a piece of paper or on a computer screen, really share joint ownership. They live and breathe that document. It's a part of their regularly structured business meetings to kind of do some checks on pieces, to tie back to their KPIs, to adjust their KPIs if they're not monitoring the right things anymore. It's certainly beneficial from that perspective, but like I said, I think it depends less on who actually owns it versus who's actually involved in it.
Thank you. And you mentioned measurement as well. So what are those metrics and KPIs that you find most meaningful when you're assessing supplier performance and relationship health? The kind of metrics which you go back to in those quarterly business reviews, annual reviews, and on a more of a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I think that depends on where you are in the journey. So obviously, if you're in an early clinical manufacturing scenario, you're looking at, it doesn't make sense to look at things like, the number of batches and whether that met plan, or it doesn't do a whole lot of value at that point to look at the cycle time of a batch for N of 1, those kinds of things. So you kind of have to think a little bit more differently. So you look at things like maybe timeliness of event notification. You look for other indicators. We had a batch, maybe again an N of 1. We had a batch commitment to meet this date. Did we do that on time or not as a partnership? So your metrics would look very different in those early stages. In the commercial relationships, you're going to look at the supply agreements for the year and develop a whole series of metrics around on-time delivery, looking at batch failure rates, how many batches are accepted versus how many are rejected. You're going to be able to look at if they're doing contract testing or they're doing all of the testing in-house, or they're either subbing some of that out. You can look at deviation rates, OS rates, you can look at plan changes, you can look at kappas. There's all kinds of things when you're in a higher batch volume scenario that you can start to add in. And that's why I say, you put these oversight plans in place at the beginning, but they're not meant to be set in stone at that point. And one of those places that always requires adjustments is in that performance space, because the performance criteria when you start out are going to look and feel very different than that longer journey towards commercialization. When you get into more routine, steady supply and demand production, that's a very different structure. Frankly, there's a lot more metrics available to you at that juncture. You've got a lot of history. When you're earlier, you don't have a lot of history. So you're going to look at maybe some more qualitative performance criteria, right? So, was the batch delivered on time? How many issues were associated with it? You'll either know it passed or it failed, but again, it's not a judgment of necessarily the overall performance, because maybe early stage, the reason the batch failed is we failed to understand something about the process and we all learned together, right? So the metric isn't I needed 20 batches of products made and you only delivered 18 of those on time and of sufficient quality. When you're in a clinical space, you need a batch, right? You need a good quality batch, but you also know a lot less about your product, right? You're still learning, especially around a manufacturing process. A lot of times we see in those early stages the troubleshooting of the process and understanding how to take a process or product manufacturing scenario out of a lab environment and put it into even small scale manufacturing equipment. That's its evolution and knowledge journey on its own. So some of the points that when you're in that early stage, maybe just qualitative of looking at the development program, looking at the number of issues that have come up and whether or not we were able to successfully get to a root cause. Like how much do we understand and know about the product and the process? Are we able to drive through those issues successfully? So that lens maybe will look different there versus down the road.
You wrote an article a while ago, Stephanie, about the total cost of quality. I'm just interested in how you'd go about making that business case for investing in quality upfront. How do you put quality into hard financials to convince the business to invest in it?
That's the $1 million question for everybody is how do you convince folks? And it's probably something that at every conference, at every webinar, at every opportunity I get, it comes up and it's a question, how do I convince people to invest in quality? And one of the simple ways I actually like to talk about is really use a very simple rule of thumb metric, which is the rule of 10, right? And when you start to look at placing that investment up front, right? The rule of 10 goes along the lines of if you detect a defect early in the process, right? You could articulate kind of what that defect costs you. So you take into account time, materials, testing, those kinds of things. And let's say, you catch a defect when you've got an inbound raw material for a particular product. So maybe that costs you $20,000 because you've invested testing time, you've invested procurement time, you've invested the sampling time, you've had it stored. So you pull up that total cost of the issues. And then you talk about the level of quality. And if you don't detect it then, and you detect it later in the process, whether it's the raw materials used in formulation, or it's now used in either tableting or filling processes later down the manufacturing, or worse yet, it's not detected until something hits the laboratory right before release, or the worst case is it's not detected until after the product's out either in a clinic or on the market. The multiplier that you use to kind of rule of thumb wise go through that is your costs go up tenfold each time. So you take that 20K and you start multiplying that by 10, and then that becomes 200K, and then it goes to $2 million, and then it goes to $2 billion. I mean, so the costs can escalate very quickly. And especially if you get to a point where an issue is not detected until you're in a clinic, or your worst case in commercial and it's on the market, you get into a situation where you're talking about recalls, and you could be talking in today's day and age about billions of dollars that are impacted. I had the unfortunate experience, and I say it's somewhat unfortunate, somewhat fortunate. Just as a consultant, I had an opportunity to be involved in a recall of well over 100 batches of sterile product. And those don't happen very often. But we were talking about billions of dollars of product at that point. And it was a manufacturing issue. So not something that could have been caught really early in the process, but was a manufacturing issue, had deviations and kind of signals coming up through the deviation system that there were issues. And it really culminated on a large section of the batch manufacturing that failed one time after another. And in this case, the lesson I took from this example, handling the recall end and not having been in the relationship and the journey to that point, is there were certainly signals that were coming up way earlier in the process where there probably should have been pauses in manufacturing. There should have been more attention paid to try and understand what was going on in that manufacturing space to prevent a situation where we were now dealing with having to pull back hundreds of batches of product, destroy that product, and remanufacture and fill that void, right? So now you're dealing with potentially impacting patients who need that medicine, and it was a critical medicine. So when you look at those kinds of things, and you can articulate that journey, and the simplest way to do it is that tenfold rule of thumb. When you're having those conversations, it's a little bit more challenging sometimes when you start to extrapolate that to whether or not you implement a computer system to do something and you go automation versus not automation. But the reality of that tenfold journey, that rule of 10, tends to hold true. And it's something that many industries, not just pharma, but many industries who focus and have strong quality initiatives in their organization will use. I think the other thing is I have had a lot of conversations in my career, especially when I was a site head of quality with senior management, around, prevention. And okay, yes, we all have to acknowledge that we can't spend all our money on doing just prevention kind of work, and there has to be a level and a way for us to prioritize the work that needs to be done. And in those cases, we would typically use things like ROI estimations and calculations to look at where we might get our biggest return on that investment, where it would have the biggest impact to that overall cost of quality calculation. And it really doesn't matter, how you look at it. If you actually were to sit down and do the really hard work of doing the actual cost of quality calculations, the investments, even if you're, let's say, worst case, investing in a new $1 million limb system, et cetera, and you're having a lot of testing, tracking issues, chain of custody issues, you're missing stability time points, like you've got a lot of systems and signals in your lab that something's going wrong. That investment definitely pays off in the long run. And when you look at the cost of quality equation, the issue with that is that what people fail to realize is that reactive measures, all of those costs that get sunk into doing deviation investigations, trying to get to root cause, trying to fix it, and sometimes you don't fix it once. Like the recall example I used, they probably had 15 different deviations they had gone after and investigated. So it had been a problem for quite some time, and they had never solved the problem. They kept trying different things. Something should have said, let's pause here and do a deeper dive. They eventually did that, but why did they wait until after 15 deviations had all of that investigative time? And obviously the more recurrences you have, the more intensive those investigations get, the more expensive they get, because now you're talking about not maybe a few people doing an investigation, you're talking about a large team on the CDMO side and the drug sponsor side that's doing those investigations. So, the simplest way I've learned to explain it for folks is really focus on that rule of 10 in those conversations. And when you start to do that and you start to put real pricing from their drug development scenario into that initial point, it's simple. Catch it at a raw material, incoming material stage. What's that investment look like already? And when those numbers start to show up as $20, $30, $40, $50,000 or more, right? Like in the cell and gene therapy, that investment could actually be quite expensive in that first go, with talking about the collection from patients, et cetera. And you look at that supply chain all the way through to the end, that number starts to get really big, really fast. And so in many cases, that's there. I think the other piece that is affecting this conversation around cost of quality has been that longstanding conversation that really popped up in the early 2000s around quality metrics. We saw this in the US and kind of infiltrated into the global stage. And that really moved from just a focus on metrics into quality culture. And that's now migrated into a conversation about quality management maturity. And I think that those conversations in that journey that we've been on with health authorities and our peers around the world is recognize that, and this goes hand in hand with cost of quality conversations, is that just bare compliance isn't sufficient. Just taking the regulations, say, I meet this is not a sufficient way to operate. And you have to find that path and avenue that works best for you, does allow you to build that strong cultural foundation, but that allows you to get to where you want to get to on that journey. Some folks like to be trendsetters and kind of first of their kind out there, but that's not the journey for everybody. But bare minimum isn't going to cut it, and it's going to be the most expensive route to go down.
You talked earlier about digitizing paper records and why that's so important in the move to a more digital operating model, giving transparency to the sponsors so that they can see exactly what's going on. Would that have helped in that scenario you just talked about there, where there's all these deviations which weren't being looked at? If it was a more transparent, digitized manufacturing process, would that help spot problems earlier?
I think sometimes it's hard to go back and look at the past events and know whether or not for sure digitization might have prevented or helped spot it earlier. I think there's a scenario where, for instance, I can see a state and industry where, digitization and automation and our understanding of machine learning and our use and deployment of AI and related tools gets to a point where, yes, it could be picked up a lot earlier. I mean, I think that there are things that we as human beings are really good at: complex problem solving, managing relationships. That creative thinking space is really, really powerful for us. But sometimes seeing trends and patterns is not necessarily a human strength, right? And computers and technology can learn and look at data and information. And I think if we had been in a space where that had all been digitized, that information had been connected, that there was a space where there was a learning process going on, and a system that could serve up, hey, this might be a signal, right, coming out of your deviation system, that this might be a problem. You may want to look into this. These events look really similar, right? Historically, especially 20 years ago, we were dealing with a person making all of those judgment calls, and the person-to-person variations and all of that kind of stuff. You get into, something can get missed, right? That whole notion that humans are fallible and we can miss things. What I'm seeing in some of the early days of this technology is the potential for technology, in a few years, maybe in that 3, 5, 7+ year space, to actually be able to take that analysis off of our shoulders. And as a quality professional, I must see it in a space where your systems are telling you and suggesting these two events might actually be related. You should take a closer look at them. Not saying that they are, it's not making a decision for you, but it's just saying that there's patterns of these that look really similar. You should probably take a look at this. And then you as a human go in and you take a deeper dive, maybe with a team of experts, and you make a decision about it. And I think that can actually only help us detect things earlier. And I see that both in the manufacturing space as well as the laboratory space, and even into the post-marketing space, where you're talking about the potential of adverse events and the impacts that could actually have back to the manufacturing world. Huge potential there to take all of this noise coming in from patients and doctors and consumers who are all using our products to say, is this really a signal or not? I mean, that's historically been done by people, right? Coding events and all of that kind of stuff. And you could teach technology to do that for you, and then to also look across those things. And then it frees you up to do that critical analysis that says, are these two things related? Do we have a larger issue? Do we need to investigate? So I see this, when I spend time thinking about the future and what it could look like, I see this really bright spot for us where if we can embrace the technology, and admittedly, pharma's not one to like to go run and embrace new technology. There's a little bit of trepidation and sometimes a little bit more fear to go in there. But, I look at what, like, for instance, the US FDA is doing here, and some of the ways that they're starting to deploy AI and advanced technology in even their own processes, that all of a sudden we could see a pretty dramatic shift in the way that data is handled, the way it's used. I see a lot of companies nowadays that have these large data lakes behind them in terms of collecting their data. And, when they're dealing with outsourcing partners, that question comes up, as we talked about, as to how does that data feed into the overall data lake that they're collecting about their products and their manufacturing processes. Those conversations are had, they're understood, and they put those pieces in place to make sure that that data is coming through. But I would say there's a wide array of technology adoption across the industry. There are some that are very advanced, and there's some that are really just still beginning their journey. And I think it'll be a number of years before we really see a space where we can coherently talk about the tangible benefits of using that. But I see a lot of prospect and promise with what I see in that technology.
What do you think would help drive adoption faster? One of the things that seems to come up again and again is that there's a real lack of standards around data exchange. How much of a stumbling block do you see that being?
Huge. We actually have had conversations with a couple of our clients that are in advanced technology, advanced manufacturing technology, or they're working with their suppliers with advanced technology. And data standards are huge. So, for instance, even something as simple as being able to communicate data from one piece of equipment to another piece of equipment right now without central standards, equipment manufacturers can come up with their own language, their own way to house that data, and it may or may not easily come out of that system. And so without that kind of effort and energy to drive that, it can make it much more challenging. And you get what we tend to talk about as islands of automation, or these sinks that are out there that aren't connected to a more central repository. And all of that power and beauty that I see, that promise I see in a very digital forward future for the industry, I think it actually is challenged by those kind of scenarios where the industry as a whole, and that may not just be drug sponsors, but it may be our equipment manufacturers and our suppliers, getting to a space where they're working together and they understand that what we need in order to achieve our mission and to create the best medicines at the most reasonable price points for patients around the world, we need them to engage in those kind of conversations where we can understand how data is being collected, how it can be made available to either larger data lakes or other systems for further processing and usage. And that challenge is real. I know that there are a lot of groups that are having conversations around maybe what should that look like, and what do data standards look like, for instance, for manufacturing equipment, and what would that look like for QC equipment. And I think maybe in some cases laboratories are maybe a little bit ahead of the curve because we've invented and grown accustomed to having these LIMS and supervisory systems. And when industry adopted them and really pushed for it, all the lab equipment vendors had to find a way to connect to a LIMS system. Like, they had to make their data available if they wanted to stay relevant and current. And I wonder if there's some of that pressure that needs to kind of come from that same space in the case of manufacturing equipment, those kinds of things, to try and drive that either data standardization or at least data availability, so that things could be pulled in. Because there's nothing worse than, kind of the old school way of doing that, where you have to do manual transitions, or, maybe one step better, you're taking it, data dump out of one system and then you're importing it in. Well, those processes have their pitfalls with them, and data can get changed or manipulated intentionally or unintentionally through those processes. So it creates extra burden in the process. So again, I think it's a space where I hear it a lot from clients that we work with, where they've got a lot of different equipment in the manufacturing space and they struggle to connect it and get information. And they're struggling, therefore, to understand their process because they can't see it all in one space. And so I hear it as a valid concern. And unfortunately, I haven't figured out what the way to tackle that one is. And I'm not sure I'm the right person to do that. But it is a real pain point for sure that's out there. So people who are feeling that, they're not alone. A lot of people are feeling that pain. And I think in some cases, even a little bit of frustration in the inability almost, or lack of movement towards that kind of standardization space. because again, we, especially from a drug sponsor point of view, we said, oh, well, this would make our lives so much easier. Like we could connect and share information more readily because maybe our CDMO is using a different piece of equipment than that CDMO if you deal with multiples. And, we could pull the data and share it across, and it just isn't always easily possible at this juncture.
Final question. You're involved with the ASQ, American Society of Quality, where you interact with people from a wide cross-section of different industries. So I'm just wondering how they would tackle problems like this, not just around data standards, but also more generally in terms of driving quality. What opportunities do you think there are for life sciences to adopt best practices from some of these other, perhaps less regulated industries?
I'm glad you're asking this. I'm a huge, obviously, active, avid member of ASQ and have been for a while. And what I really have valued out of that relationship and connecting with members of a variety of industries is engaging in a lot of these conversations about quality and how do they view quality. And it's not even just the folks that maybe are in a less regulated space, or when I look at the society in total, we stem from everywhere from automotive manufacturers to financial services to retail to educational institutions, to your more regulated industries like pharma, nuclear, aerospace and defense, where there are regulations in play around what we do. But the opportunity to have the conversations and to I've done some benchmarking just even on the cost of quality. So how do you guys look at this? And do these really big data rich calculations, or have you gotten to smaller calculations? And that's where I've learned that many folks don't actually spend the time and energy to do the big fancy cost of quality calculations. They use the rule of thumb because it holds true. It just, the time over time, it holds through. And instead of spending the time, data, and energy to collect all that data to do the actual calculations, they prefer to do those things. And I think that learning those practices and understanding maybe where people have, whether it's perceived or real freedom to maybe reinvent, the way we approach quality or the way we might tackle a digital investment, initiative within an organization, to hear from them as to what they learned, what the value is they're getting out of it, and then take that information and look at it through our lens and say, okay, well, this is a really great idea. Is this possible for us? Can we do this? And to get out of this mode that I know we all encounter where we've always done it this way, so therefore we're going to continue to do it this way. The leaders in the quality culture, in their quality management journey, don't think like that. They are constantly out there learning from others, challenging themselves to not just continue to do things that way because that's where they're comfortable, but kind of taking an attitude and a mindset of there's got to be a better way to do this. And I think that's this beauty of this space. While, I probably, if you'd asked me some of these questions a year or two ago, I might have had a very different answer, but I spent a lot of time reading and talking to people who are involved in AI and machine learning and a lot of these programs and the evolution of technology. And it is in itself at its infancy. It's not super developed, and no, robots aren't taking over the world tomorrow. That's not where we are in our journey. But the things that it can do and the level of automation that can free up somebody to do things that are much more natural and where we're really well suited to do is phenomenal. And I think what I see in some of these companies that aren't regulated, when I talk to them in the ASQ circles and technical communities, is they feel like they've got the freedom to do that. Like they will go out there and play with generative AI or look at, instituting natural language processing into their tools and processes so that they can do stuff better and faster, right? Their focus is a little bit different than, we've always got this kind of looming concern of, well, yeah, but I've got all these regulations, I've got all these requirements I've got to comply with. Sometimes that problem feels really big to solve. But I think if we start looking for partners, if we start looking for people who understand the nuances in that space, and that may be people who are not in our own industry, that are maybe in a non-regulated space, learn from them, see what they've been able to do with technology, where they've been able to take it. And it doesn't mean it's going to plop and fit into your company or your organization, but it may give you the inspiration to have that next conversation that figures out how to make it work for you. I think that that's the space that the ASQ circles have provided me, is that opportunity to really leverage those conversations. I did this. I'm probably the most recent example is there's this group within the quality circles and industry that really has a passion for driving competency-based education in the industry. So getting away from this document by document training philosophy that somehow our industry has gotten ourselves into, and this is the way we do things again. But having documented evidence of training on every procedure is just something that we've always done, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're demonstrating that our people are competent to do the work that they're being asked to do. And so there's this shift in movement in the industry and conversations that are happening with the FDA and the EMA and the MHRA about is this the wrong way to be looking at things? Should we be looking at things a little bit differently? Because when you go and you benchmark and you talk to people in aerospace, they're not as concerned about things like, do I have this document that says this mechanic was trained on doing this? What they infuse in their process through their education and job programs is a base level of knowledge of, I know where to go to get all the information I need. Like, I'm not going to know the ins and outs of every single plane off the top of my head. But me as a mechanic on a plane, I need to know where to go and how to get that information. And I have the raw tactical skills to be able to fix things. I just need the instructions to do this. So there's a different view on that educational program they have for their employees than I've historically seen in our industry. And so as I started to see, and this was probably 5 or so years ago that I started asking these questions, I started myself to shift my own perception of what we were doing in industry. And then when I found this group of people, it's like all of a sudden I connected with them, and I started doing some benchmarking for them with these other industries and other groups within the ASQ circles. So it can be valuable. It's not that we can just lean into them and say, oh, well, this group does this, so we can do this. It's not quite that simple, but there's some great ideas and some great innovation that's out there. And sometimes you don't have to be the first to come up with the idea. Sometimes I worked for a company, this was quite a while ago, where we were going through a cultural change in our own company, and we instituted, I think we called it the Golden Monkey Award. And it sounds so silly, and it was this goofy little plastic gold looking trophy. But we awarded it to the person, not that came up with the best idea, that actually borrowed an idea and really made it impactful for the company. Like, somebody had an idea, did it in a small space. It worked really well, but we rewarded that recognition that said, hey, that idea is fantastic. I'm going to take it out of maintenance and I'm going to apply it to manufacturing in the lab and our R&D group, and we're going to make this thing really work for the company and reward the fact that it's not just the innovation, but it's also the ability to take that innovation and say, this is great, this could really benefit us, and let's make it work.
I love that. Love the golden monkey.
Yeah, it's something, it's one of those things that there's few things that kind of sit with you as you go through your career. That's one of them. I thought it was hysterical when, I can't even remember who came up with it, but that's what we called it, what we did. And it worked. It really, not that innovation wasn't important to us, because innovation was, but it changed the tone, that the replication was just as important. So coming up with a great idea is one thing, but being able to replicate that and infuse that in the organization was even more valuable.
Stephanie, this has been, without a doubt, the most interesting conversation about quality I've ever had. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed being here, and I appreciate you for inviting me on your podcast and taking the time to talk with me about my sometimes a little out there views on quality.
Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
Over the past year, we've interviewed more than 100 experts in biopharma outsourcing, So we thought it would be useful to distill all those best practices into Outsourcing Fundamentals, an online training course that gives you and your team a foundation in successful outsourcing. Take this course for a comprehensive overview of the key trends shaping biopharma outsourcing. Over 4 hours, this course will give you 10 modules of expert insights and case studies including vendor selection, contract negotiation, quality oversight, tech transfers and more. Each module comes with helpful resources, interactive quizzes and a certificate of completion. Listeners to this podcast can get a full £100 off by using the code POD100, that's POD100, when you get to the checkout. To find out more, head to pharmasource.global/fundamentals.